Good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight at the event that is sponsored by the Center for Politics and the People, the Department of Philosophy, and Computer and Data Sciences. We appreciate your attendance and would like to thank Professor Jeffries from the Department of Philosophy and Professor Plain from the Computer and Data Sciences for their cooperation and support in planning this event. I'm Henrik Schatzinger, director of the center, and I'm also a professor of political science. To those of you who are visiting us, welcome to Ripon College. Today, we are fortunate to welcome Professor Mathias Risse from Harvard University. Professor Risse is the Bertolt Brecht Professor in Human Rights, Global Affairs, and Philosophy, and the director of the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy. He is a renowned scholar in the field of ethics and political philosophy, and his work has had a profound impact on the way we think about important issues at the intersections of technology and society. Today he will address a topic of great importance, AI and democracy. In a world where AI is steadily infiltrating our everyday existence, Risse's research and insights on the ethical and political implications of AI are of utmost importance. His work explores the challenges AI poses to democracy, individual rights, and social justice. Through his thought-provoking research and writing, he has shed light on the ways AI can both enhance and potentially threaten our democratic values. His expertise in ethics and his deep understanding of the implications of emerging technologies make him the perfect authority to shed light on the challenges and opportunities that arise as AI continues to shape our democratic institutions. With AI becoming increasingly integrated into our lives, from automated decision-making systems to the use of AI in election processes, it is essential that we have a nuanced and informed perspective on the impact of these technologies on the democratic principles that underpin our societies. To illustrate the utility of AI, I copied these last sentences I just said from ChatGPT after prompting it to write a, quote, introductory speech for Mathias Risse on the topic of AI and democracy. But laziness is not a virtue, so let me add a couple of other notes that are not from ChatGPT. Risse is a native of Westphalia, Germany, and he holds bachelor's degrees in philosophy and mathematics, as well as a Master of Science degree in mathematics from the University of Bielefeld, Germany. He received his PhD in philosophy from Princeton in 2000. He taught in the Department of Philosophy at Yale University before coming to Harvard in 2002. He is the author of a number of books, including on global justice, on justice, global political philosophy, on trade justice, and holding together the hijacking of rights in America and how to reclaim them for everyone. His most recent book is the one that inspired me to invite him, namely Political Theory of the Digital Age, Where Artificial Intelligence May Take Us. Before we hear from him, let me mention that this is program number 100 for me as a co-director, interim director, or now director of the center. And since 2016, August 2016, we have invited 240 speakers and panelists. I want to thank some people in this context who help make these events possible and who have been amazing to work with. Let me start with our student assistants. Right now, Aaron O'Halloran, who's sitting right here, Aaron will graduate this December, and he has been outstanding in every way, basically. And in the past, we've had a number of other fantastic assistants as well, who are now alumni, including Austin Borchert, Abby Core, and Tucker Theed. Students also do airport runs. Some of them of our recent drivers have been Angie Martorello, Ellison Pavlovich, Shazia Puri, and Ryan Vasquez. Two of the drivers, yes, they sit here. Also, I want to thank the whole marketing team and the team for web development. Everybody from Rick Dahm to Jay Alderson, Ben Cleveland, and Jessica Ehrenberg have been tremendous in helping us to get these events set up. Everything from designing posters to writing press releases. We also have our plant department or facilities department, where we have Susie Foodie and John Tobin and others who are always there to really help us in many different ways. And I also want to mention thank you to, back in the day it was Sodexo, now we have Sage Dining Services for helping with receptions and dinners. Just two more thank yous. I want to say one more time thank you to my previous co-director, Professor Emeritus Brian Smith. It was wonderful to work with him. I checked last night, I still have over 10,000 email exchanges with him about the CPP. And I also want to thank the Center's advisory board. We actually have Rick, where are you? Lewandowski, he is here, he is on the advisory board, he's the trustee of the board of trustees, our student advisory board, and the Ripon College administration for all of their support of the center since the inception in 2014. And now, it is actually, let's thank all of these people one more time. And now it is time to hear Professor Risse's perspective on the vital topic of AI and democracy. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mathias Risse.
Thank you, Hendrik, for this very kind introduction. Bear with me for just a moment, because there's something I need to tell you about Princeton University, where, as Hendrik just told you, I was a graduate student, and it will become clear to you in 30 seconds why I need to say this now. So Princeton University is amazingly good at fundraising, right? It's kind of notorious for that. And one way in which they do that is they always keep track of you. They always know where you are. So I graduated more than 20 years ago, and each time I've moved since then, I got some mail, something from Princeton, the Alumni Association, before anybody else wrote. So we don't even let them know when we move, because I know they will somehow find us, so they keep track of us. Why am I thinking of that? Well, if I'm looking to the back of the room, over there, this man there, Harold Shapiro, was the president of Princeton University when I was a graduate student there. So they find me even here. Keep an eye on me even while I'm here. So I feel like I'm under some eerie scrutiny from President Shapiro of Princeton University. So that's it, and I try not, it's kind of hard not to look that way. Anyway, here we go. So I'd like to talk to you about a few themes from this recent book of mine on political theory of the digital age, which is really an attempt to look at a number of debates about politics that we as political philosophers, political theorists have been having over the ages, and to explore what the arrival of artificial intelligence means for that. And the themes that I'm going to be discussing with you this evening are themes from democracy. How does the arrival of artificial intelligence engage democracy, and specifically what has been changing there in just this year? So the pace of change in that domain is really breathtaking. So this last year, so this depends a little bit which time window you're looking at. The last 10 years have been breathtaking. The last 5 years have been breathtaking. Each of these periods in their own way, but really this year, these last 6 to 8 months have been just astoundingly breathtaking. So it's just a lot happening. You might of course say, who would be foolish enough to write a book about this? About an area that has such a pace of change, and you would not be wrong raising that question. At the same time, the reason I wanted to do this, and I did do this, is because there are certain philosophical background themes, certain larger challenges, that are not aging quite as quickly as technological developments advance. So I think there's a certain durability to this anyway. And there's always a point. The reason I like writing books rather than articles is because writing books forces you to look at a lot of things together rather than just focus on one or two things. So that was the motivation. So this talk very much draws on some themes from that book, and There's a number of themes I'd like to bring to your attention, and they get numbered in this way, some more basic ways, and then some more specific to the recent developments around ChatGPT, which I can tell has fully arrived here, is fully put to use. One sometimes wonders whether, you have to be careful with this kind of thing, Henrik, because, there's all these suspicions that they make us redundant anyway, and you just confirmed, what else can they do, if they can write introductory speeches, before you know it, they, I do find this funny, when I you can ask students, are you okay with ChatGPT doing this and this and this, and they're always okay. Then you ask, are you okay if ChatGPT grades your papers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
They can probably do it better than we can. But.
No, I like this discretionary points.
Anyway, let me jump right in with some of the more foundational points here. So. One thing that's in the background, also in my book, Political Theory of the Digital Age, is to look at democracy somewhat differently from how this is normally done in political philosophy and political theory. Typically, we understand democracy as an ideal of human beings doing something together. It's about a certain kind of decision processes, a certain ideal of community, a certain ideal of doing things together as human beings. So it's very human focused. It's a very human focused understanding of democracy. It's very natural to think this way. And there's also per se nothing wrong with that, but there is also another dimension to that, and that is the materiality of democracy. So as we are doing democracy, as we are going about decision making, as we are going about doing community, this always involves material things. It involves objects, artifacts that are there that make this more or less easy or that push us in a certain way. And that is a theme actually in the philosophy of technology. So the systematic thinking about technology, this point was about 40 years ago, was classically made by a philosopher named Langdon Winner, who wrote a paper called Do Artifacts Have Politics? It's one of the coolest titles also of a paper ever, so that's kind of important, right? So, if you want to get ideas out to people having cool titles, it's important. So Do Artifacts Have Politics? And, people read that just because it seems like, what is talking about? Do artifacts have politics? I mean, not like last time I was at some town hall, no artifact spoke out, right? So how could they have politics? What he means is, let me give you an example. So you see this bridge in the background there. So it's easily illustrated what this means in terms of infrastructure. Yeah? So one example he uses has become hotly debated. There's a number of parkways around New York City where they have a lot of bridges, across there. So if you drive in Connecticut, there's famous Connecticut 15, it's very, very beautiful road. Lots of bridges, every mile or so, every half of there's a bridge. Right? Low bridges. And that does at least two things. One thing is it really makes it a very beautiful drive because each of these bridges is very different. And on Long Island they also have some of these parkways. But it also means trucks and buses cannot pass there. So if you are the kind of person who can travel from A to B only on that road, and you need a bus to get there, you just can't get there, right? So you can only get to that B if you have a car. And so there is an impact. So you put this bit of infrastructure there, and it has a kind of discriminatory impact, and often there's a discriminatory intent. Especially this has been hotly debated. There's a particular designer in the history of New York City, Robert Moses, who for all we know did this quite intentionally, right? He wanted to keep low-income people from reaching certain parts, certain beaches. Low-income people tended to be black people, so there was a racist component to all of that. And infrastructure, of course, is often like that, right? So we build streets, we build public transportation, or we do not build public transportation. We might dismantle public transportation. Again, we build connections or don't build connections. And that enables certain people to do things and prevents other people from doing things. And that's what Winner means by saying artifacts have politics. You can design, for streets it's really obvious, right? For traffic, urban design, it's fairly obvious. You can design traffic patterns, public transportation in very different ways that will be more or less favorable for particular groups. So that's what's meant by artifacts have politics. And this also means something then very specifically for the design of electoral processes, for the design of democracy. So back in the Greek days, when democracy, at least, we had versions of democracy in very different parts of the world. So this is actually something very important also to reiterate, because we, in Western civilization, there's a certain historiography to this, and we got used to thinking this, that only the Greeks had democracy in the old days, and therefore only the Europeans had democracy, and therefore from there came to the United States, right? But nobody else except people of European descent had democracy. That is actually not true. That is just one of these Western focused things that we just need to leave behind. But the Greeks definitely had democracy, and they had the materiality. There was a material things played a very important role for keeping their democracy going and for making their democracy trustworthy. This thing here doesn't look like much now. So if you ever get to Athens and you look at the museums around the sites there, the Agora and the Acropolis in Athens, you find fascinating museums. And this thing is the Cleroterion, and this was basically an allotment machine. So when this looked better, then there was some wooden paraphernalia around it. So basically, what this does, it's a randomization machine that makes sure that different groups, they call them, actually the technical term for that is they talk about tribes in the Athenian context. These different tribes are all, the members of these tribes are randomly assigned to the various committees, right? All decision making is done by randomly assigned representative groups to make sure that the full knowledge of the population is brought to bear in all collective decision making. And that was very important. The whole point of Athenian democracy really was that these processes, that the whole electorate was counted. So because it's a different democracy from ours, there were only a sub-part of the adult males were eligible, right? So a lot of people lived there, a lot of people were slaves, and they were not involved in the democracy. There was a demos that was a subgroup of the white males who lived there. But among those, the idea was they were all equally competent, right? And so that is why, except for times of crisis when they empowered particular people for certain periods of time, the idea really was they do this together. And random assignments to assemblies and committees was absolutely essential, and this machine did that, and it was seen to be doing it, so that everybody understood where people were on this committee for that year. And so they had a number of other devices. This thing is a timekeeper, so you have an assembly, right, and just to make sure, and you see this does not just kind of keep the time behind the scenes and then somebody says, you are done now. This is very visible, right, so that everybody, we turn this thing around, we put the sand again, in, so everybody sees when it's over, right, so when the chairperson then says, your time is up, then everybody knows that they're right, so everybody can tell this by themselves. So these things are very important device, and the Athenian democracy was actually a very successful thing, right, for a while, and then kind of larger political events kicked in, and so eventually was swallowed up by the Roman Empire. But it was very successful, and partly because they got the materiality right. They had these devices that made it obvious to everybody, visible to everybody, that things were done in a fair way. So fast forward when we come to the modern age. So there is something genuinely extraordinary about what happened in the United States in the 18th century, that this idea of democracy was transferred from the ancient world into the modern age, into a completely different geographic setting, right? So large territorial democracies. In between, the word democracy largely had a pejorative name, right? It was mostly, masses taking over, right? It had this sort of association, random rule by the masses, so that there could be an orderly rule of the people. That was something that had been falling out of fashion, that had fallen out of fashion for a long time, and then it was tried here again. And then you had this challenge about how do we do this? So how do we make sure it's fair? How do we, and we need things for that. We need objects for that. And so there were ballots. And so ballots, these are kind of original ballots. So ballot is actually an Italian word. Means it's a little round thing, right? That's what a ballot actually is. And there was informal voting way before there was a country called the United States, and they would be using all sorts of things that could be counted, could be peas, could be bullets, could be stones, anything that was available and could be used for counting. Right? So the original ballots often looked like this. And then later, once this was all more formalized and we had the United States, they started using paper ballots, right? But you've got to think, the way this looks today, what happens when you go vote, it's, that was a process that led to that, right? And so in between, at some point they started using paper ballots, but using paper ballots in the 19th century is actually very tricky because a lot of people can't write. Yeah? So you are excluding people, here disenfranchising people if you're using paper ballots. And that's how we get these symbols, the donkey and the elephant, right? Because this would be in newspapers and people would just cut it and they would go to the voting booth with that and say, these guys, right? So there needed to be an image for that. And there were all sorts of crazy things, right? So, people, then people didn't have to write newspaper and can I just write down. So this was very chaotic until they started importing something, the United States imported something from Australia. The state of Victoria and Australia introduced this for the first time. That's why it's called the Australian ballot. Right? No, but it's not called it because everybody thinks it's kind of somehow was natural, right? But it really wasn't. What we do today, right? The state provides the paper, and the state, makes sure that everybody has a quiet place where people can actually, do this. At least that's the idea, right? And people ideally would find it easily and all of that. And we know problems around that, but that's in a way. So that's a long story, right? So how we actually, the mechanics of this. And in the United States, this has always been difficult. In the United States, the materiality of democracy has always been hard, has always been contested. And the contrast to the Athenian scenario really is quite striking, right? So for the success of the Athenian democracy had a lot to do with the fact that they used things the right way. And in the United States, this has always been hard. Right? It's always been hard to use things the right way to make democracy trustworthy. And those of you old enough to remember the hanging chads, right? So this seems, by hindsight, it seems like a fairly peaceful problem, right, compared to what we have had recently. But you see also what we have had recently, that somebody who very clearly lost the election can actually persuade large numbers of the electorate that he hasn't lost the election because of large-scale voter fraud. One necessary condition for that was widespread distrust in the materiality of democracy, right? So people found it very easy to believe that American democracy doesn't quite know what to do with things, in order to make democracy happen. Hanging chads are one example. It's somehow something that American democracy has found very hard to get right. And that's why creating distrust around it was fairly easy, to do. So that's point one. So the materiality of democracy is an incredibly important topic. You need to use the right kind of objects, the right kind of way, in order to have a stable democracy. Right? This is just something that is often not seen if we think of democracy as an ideal of people doing things together. Point two. Generally, the relationship between democracy and technology. So there is a kind of a naive view around, and that also is still there because in the early stages of the internet it was repeated many times, and still there's some echoes of that, even though there's a bit of a pendulum and optimism, pessimism about how good technology is for democracy. But one perception there is more technological advances will be good for democracy, will advance democracy. Right? That is one view there, and that is actually really not true. So there's a lot of complexity there. Depends on what you start from. Right? There's lots of path dependencies there. So you can think about when are we getting democracies in the first place, and when are we not getting democracies? And often we do get democracies. Democracies emerge when it's hard for a centralized state power to emerge that has enough information about people. So a centralized state power can emerge only if you know enough about people that you know how to tax them, how to motivate them, how to draft them, in a way how to get them, right? And that requires a lot of information. And if the state is in a position to get this information, that makes it easier for that to be an autocratic regime. Yeah? And so for there not to be a democracy, in a way, if people don't need to be empowered, they often won't be empowered. And another condition under which we're getting democracy, if it's very hard for people to leave, to go elsewhere, so to flee from the power. So if you have a situation where, for historical reasons, it is already the case that the state knows a lot about people, it has a lot of information, it has a bureaucracy that brings in a lot of information about people, if it's very hard for people to flee the state, to go elsewhere, then technological advances are actually decidedly not democratizing. They will typically strengthen the autocratic rule because they make the bureaucracy more efficient and effective. Yeah? So it strengthens the bureaucracy. If you know, of course, if you in that sense, so simply to think more technology or also more economic growth will actually lead to more democracy more or less automatically. That's wrong, and I'm going to talk about China in that regard in a moment. At the same time, as we're thinking about the modern democracy, right? So modern democracy. So let's think about United States or any European country as of now. Modern democracy has these two problems that never seem to be going away. One is the distant state problem. The capital is in Washington, right? So it's very far from Ripon, right? It's very far from Wisconsin, and why are you owing allegiance to these guys, right? So, it's one thing if you live in Athens and you go to the Acropolis and you can be on a committee, you see the state, you feel the state, you're surrounded by the state, you are the state. It's not hard to feel this way. In this huge country, it's very hard to feel this way, right? So there's this distant state problem, and there's this other problem, the overbearing executive problem. If somebody is on top who gets carried away, who thinks that them being in a certain role is more important than that the role be perpetuated, right? So there's a danger for democracy that it puts people in central power, and it, in principle, enables them to stay there longer than they should. So these are the two problems that democracy faces, and they often don't get solved successfully. It's very hard to see how they would be solved. These problems would be solved without sophisticated use of technology. So on the one hand, we have to notice that it's not natural for more technology to bring more democracy, right? This is not an immediate relationship. At the same time, democracy needs to somehow find a way with democracy in order to keep itself credible. So it somehow has to enlist democracy to solve these two problems. Some people are incredibly pessimistic when it comes to how technology and democracy can come together. This guy might not mean much to you. Jacques Ellul is a French philosopher of technology, but many of you will have seen this guy, right? So at least the older ones will have seen this guy, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who died a few months ago, right? So why am I talking about him? Well, so this is his philosophical inspiration, Jacques Ellul. This is a very scary book, The Technological Society. He's arguing there that technology basically has its own way of functioning. Right? There's dynamics in the development of technology that brings us along as individuals, but we are only under an illusion of control over it. We are under an illusion that we shape it, that we are under an illusion that we are free to use it or not. We are under an illusion that we have an active say in where it is going. And it has its own dynamic. It's the thesis of the autonomy of technology. Very simple-minded test on that. If you can see how long you can live without this, right? See how long you can. It's very simple-minded, right? So, and then people think, yeah, it's an option that I use this or not. Is it really an option, right? Is this really an option? So much technology around us, cars, cell phones, computers, right? Are they really? I mean, we think it's an option, right? But so Ellul's point is it's not. There's kind of these dynamics, and he thinks even democracy itself is kind of an illusion because what really drives things are technological dynamics. And Ted Kaczynski agreed to that, and that is why he sent these terrible letter bombs to people, right? To technology creating and technology advocating people. To blow them to pieces, so to draw attention to this, right? So he was trying to do that. So it's fascinating to look currently at the situation in China, right? So in terms of this relationship, autocracy / democracy and technology. So many people who know things about China, some 10 or 15 years ago thought exactly this thing, and more technology and more economic growth, there will be more democracy. Right? China will go this way. Did not happen. Right? Did not happen. In fact, something strikingly different happened. The Chinese Communist Party enlisted technology, enlisted enormous hardware producing possibilities, enormous data gathering possibilities in order to completely update and upgrade their political system to the 21st century, through large-scale state surveillance and data collection and ongoing. It's an absolutely scary phenomenon at what scale this is happening in China. So they're doing lots of fascinating things there. I mean, they're still the Communist Party of China. Karl Marx would not count them as such, so they're not very puristic about things. But they have a party structure and they have a lot of control. So more technology has strengthened their particular version of autocratic rule. Right? At the same time, then there's this other version of China, this other way of being Chinese in Taiwan. And it's really the contrast between those utterly striking as you know. So Taiwan, the older ones of you will remember that when we used to buy the things made in Taiwan that used to be plastic stuff, cheaply manufactured stuff. In between, they turned themselves into this massive semiconductor chips powerhouse. Right? They're ahead of everybody else, and it looks like basically they can't be. Nobody really can catch up with that, right? So they're just the world champions in chips production. And they have also, democracy in Taiwan is about as old as the internet. So this person here is one of the pop stars of kind of global democracy. Audrey Tang is the minister, the kind of technology internet minister in Taiwan. They're doing absolutely amazing things, kind of using technology for democracy, strengthening democracy. And Audrey Tang likes to say, for us in Taiwan, the internet is a technology of democracy because they are the same age, right? We have never been democratic without the internet, and we have never had an internet without we have always used these together. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating, and the contrast is fascinating, right? And this is why, of course, Xi Jinping, leader of China, is so, eager to just end this, because they are parading to him a completely different way of being Chinese, right? A way of being thoroughly Chinese and thoroughly democratic, right? So the contrast really quite fascinating there. So if you look generally, so how optimistic should one be for, so the United States, so this is an entrenched democracy, so it's been a democracy for a long time. So in a situation like that, more technology, there's also no reason to think it will derail that, right? Again, a lot of path dependency there. But one thing to notice is, here's one very influential argument for democracy that has persuaded a lot of people, and it was a good argument, definitely then. Hayek, right? Friedrich August von Hayek writes this thing, The Road to Serfdom, in the 1930s, about articulating concerns about any kind of state control. Everything should be left to markets as much as possible, and popular decision-making processes. It's more an argument for markets than for democracy. But there is a kind of follow-up argument for democracy they're also involved, namely the idea that there's so much information that matters about interaction, economic interaction. The state couldn't possibly have it all. So the social planner couldn't possibly have it all. Let's let the markets do what they want to do. Let's not centralize. Let's decentralize, because again, this is a better way of using information. It's a better way of using information to just let a lot of people do with it as they see fit. And that argument might actually no longer work in the 21st century, because the enormous possibilities of big data and AI, data mining, might just undermine that argument. And the Chinese government is demonstrating that. The Chinese, or at least the jury is still out. So this idea that automatically decentralization does better than centralization is obviated through the arrival of the possibilities of AI, at least that particular point. And one also has to worry. So as we think about where's democracy and tech going, Sam Bankman-Fried, right, is on trial right now. So he might not be a representative of this. So this book here. So Silicon Valley, right? There's where much of the tech production happens these days. The mood there is very anti-democratic. They are technocratic, right? They think technocrats should rule. They are very weary of democracy. And there's been the philosophy in the background is this here by McAskill, what we owe the future, and this is the view here. This comes out of effective altruism and then went into, it's called long-termism. Long-termism is the idea that what really matters, looking forward, the design of society is existential threats that might come our way, in the future, right? So long-termism, think about the long term, how to prevent planetary collapse and things like that, right? And that all sounds good, but what it also means is a neglect of the problems that are in front of us, and all sorts of excuses are given. We are doing this, we are doing all sorts of weird things because we are doing them for the greater good, long-term conceived. And I think something like that went wrong with that scene, right? So these guys, so Bankman-Fried, I've been following this over a number of years. This was actually when, then there was a time 15 years ago when there were a number of highly motivated geeks, typically computer science majors with an interest in philosophy. And they were sometimes annoying, they were typically smart, but there was nothing particularly threatening about them. Until some of them became billionaires. Quite a number of them became billionaires and all sorts of things in between. And all of a sudden there was money everywhere. You put a proposal to them around something like that, and they just basically gave you what you wanted and then much more, right? So it was absolutely crazy how much that flourished. And there was this mentality, kind of long-termism, let's think ahead, and that is of course, well, not of course, but that once implemented took on also this kind of anti-democratic streak, right? So it's a very distinctly anti-democratic streak among many people who build technology these days. So it's very worrisome there. Point 3, so this is a reminder how much breakthroughs there have been. So this is something, those of you who are now roughly 20 years old, you live in exciting times. I mean, we all live in exciting times, but they are for you to shape. So it's just amazing what has happened there since roughly 2010. The availability of data, conceptual breakthroughs, hardware breakthroughs, storage breakthroughs. I mean, there's all sorts of things that happened behind the scenes. Then in recent times, so this happened just last year when a Google engineer, Blake Lemoine, came out with this thing and said, I know a person when I talk to it, right? So I know when something's conscious. So he believed that his chat engine was a conscious person. And the interesting thing about this is not, is he right or wrong? It's actually, how would we actually verify? It's actually a highly trivial question, right? So consciousness in non-organic material, right? So, but in a way, the point is more, much before 2022, nobody with any claim to being taken seriously, which this guy clearly has, would have said anything like this, right? But he came out with it in 2022. So, massive acceleration there. Lots of people getting worried, right? So right now, kind of pessimism is on vogue. And including, this is also scary, right? So it's you find that, right? So you find that the people who build cutting-edge technology, you do a survey with them. You ask about risks. How do you feel about the future, and that this might take over, might destroy us. And typically, there's something between 5 and 10% of existential breakdown coming out of that. That the people who build technology think face. Think about this, right? Next time you take a plane. Right, so think, there had been a survey among the people who built, and we work for Boeing or the other people. So they built the plane and take a survey. What's the likelihood that sometime during the life of this plane it's gonna it's gonna just collapse? It's gonna crash. Right, it's like roughly 7%. Nobody would take a plane. Right, nobody was like way too high as a risk. But this is what we find in this domain. And so acceleration here. So this guy, some of you might know him, Ray Kurzweil, is an acknowledged expert, kind of a tech predictor who's often been right. Wrote a while ago this book, The Singularity is Near. So singularity is when we have this intelligence explosion, right? When we build an artificial intelligence broadly smarter than us, and we build it, that means it can probably build something that is slightly broadly smarter than it, and so on, right? That's the intelligence explosion. That's the singularity. So he thought a while ago it's near. He has this new book coming out. It's called The Singularity is Nearer, and he thinks nearer. He thinks this is the year. So think wisely about what you do. 2029, especially young people, right? 2029, things might happen. So Kurzweil has a scary record of being right about these things. So singularity is nearer. And yeah, then we get this acceleration. Yeah? So Midjourney many of you, who's using Midjourney? Any of you use Midjourney? You know what Midjourney is? Anybody know? So Midjourney is basically the image counterpart to ChatGPT. Yeah? So you can, and I'm going to show you some examples. You can ask Midjourney, and there's other programs like that. It's not as user-friendly as ChatGPT. One needs to kind of get used to giving commands, but it's putting images together that are really just for you. So they come out of nowhere. So we get Midjourney. Midjourney is about as old as ChatGPT, so this is happening just this year, right? And so this is a timeline for this year. This guy, Stuart Russell, is one of the most famous computer science people in this field. So this is all this year, right? In March 14, OpenAI releases ChatGPT 4, the version that we're still using. And that really sent shockwaves. I mean, what that could do just shocked people. And so there was all sorts of political action coming. The White House reacts, and the UK is now putting a global summit in AI together. Rishi Sunak, British Prime Minister, tries to seize the opportunity, for the UK to be a global leader. They're doing that actually next week, and putting the summit together. And so lots of things are happening this year, just in a sheer sort of panic reaction to the release of ChatGPT. And so this is ChatGPT, the version 4 that we're using. So this is where we are now. Let me tell you a little bit about Midjourney and how it connects to concerns that have been around for longer. So Midjourney, so a little bit about the background. So one, in terms of what potential damage can come from this. So one concern about AI, about all the data processing, data mining, is that it is perpetuating structural disadvantage from the past. Yeah? So everything looks like it's now, the computer did this. Yeah? And the data that we are using are always data that we have created in the past, and our past has a lot of ugly sides to it. Yeah? And so this is a massive danger that, think about in there's lots of examples where this comes up in hiring, right? So we're using AI mechanisms, data collection for hiring. Women typically don't fare well with that, because there's not a good record of hiring women, right? So and that's kind of perpetuated into the future because, kind of prejudicial attitudes towards women in the workforce are now statistically reflective and taken seriously going forward, right? And, brushes with the law, who goes to prison and all of that, that is kind of considered. And of course, this is all reflecting a deeply racist past that we have and that we badly need to get out of. But if we are collecting data based on it and analyze it, we're just kind of writing it further into the future. And this is something that people have drawn attention to. Rua Benjamin at Princeton is a leading scholar, and she coined some pretty striking vocabulary for that. So she talks about Jim Crow, right? So we had Jim Crow. And Jim Crow used to be, the early version of Jim Crow used to be in-your-face sort of racism, right? So you can't sit here, you can't be there, there's this division, black people there, white people there. Then there was the new Jim Crow. It was more refined, was more sophisticated, but it still had this exclusionary effect for people of color. And now she talks about the new Jim Code as a deliberate sort of parallel formulation. Yeah? So we are basically, there's this progression. We think we are doing better, but we are really just working with the same data that have always been there, and so we are just perpetuating the same stuff into the same exclusionary and oppressive tendencies into the future. So Race After Technology is the book there. Joy Buolamwini is another person here who is very influential. So these people have been writing very much and have been very prominent since roughly 2016. 2016 is a bit of a watershed year here. Since then, people kind of got more nervous about this. It is not an accident that these are typically women of color who drew attention to this. Right? So lots of women of color doing things here. Joy Buolamwini calls herself a poet of code, was a computer scientist who made some pretty striking discoveries. She worked with facial recognition software, and she realized that her black face was just not picked up by the software. And at first she didn't make much of that, but then she was on a research trip to Hong Kong, right? And they had a robot there doing some facial recognition stuff, and again it was the case that her face was not recognized by the facial recognition software. Why does this happen? Well, because the learning data typically are learning data used from white people. Often the people who do the engineering there, who work there, are white people and don't pay much attention to that. Right? And so before we know it, this is not limited to facial recognition. There's a lot of recognition, sensitivity mechanisms, right, that have a hard time. Also in medicine, there's parts of medicine where this is really dangerous, where the ability to detect something about people of color is much worse than about white people. And so she drew attention to that with this, and then at some point she started using this mask, because the facial recognition software could actually recognize a white mask and identify a white mask much better, much more reliably than her face. Yeah. So so she drew very much attention to these dangers in facial recognition. And so now back to Midjourney. So this happened this year. Amy Webb, some of you may know Amy Webb. She runs an organization in New York. Forget what it's called, something technology now. So they're basically doing updates on technology every year. And so she gave this talk this year, and she wanted to see how Midjourney is doing with faces, with women in particular, right? So instructions there. So she wanted to see whether Midjourney is also perpetuating these stereotypes about race and gender. She was particularly interested here in this case in gender. And so what she did was she wanted Midjourney to construct an image of a CEO. And notice this. So what Midjourney does. It's really putting these together from scratch. So these are not photos from anywhere. It's just putting them together using all the photographic material. So CEO of a large company. That's what they look like. You see four images, 4 white men of a certain age range. Right? That is what comes out CEO of a large company. And then she did. So how about CEO of a startup? Maybe there's a woman coming out of that. Right? So this is CEO of a startup. You can see they're now younger, fewer ties, but they're still all white men. Right? So there's nothing about the instructions that pushed it towards either white or men. Right? It was just CEO of a startup. Then she did something very clever. She looked for the metropolitan area in the United States with the largest share of women executives. Yeah? So most leadership figures in the private sector filled by, relatively speaking, most. And that happened to be Jackson, Mississippi, for whatever reason. Right? I mean, we're not talking about like stunning numbers, but like more than in other metropolitan areas. So CEO of a company in Jackson, Mississippi. So you see, still no woman, but now we have a couple of black guys. Right? So at least there's some progress there. And then she thought, okay, at least if it's female hygiene products, at least then we are getting a female person. So CEO of a company that makes tampons. You can also see, what that made of, what you want to use. So it's that question. But we're still not getting a single woman coming out of this. Right? So and you see, this is the danger, right? Perpetuating stereotypes. Right? Even the tampon company is not led by a woman as far as Midjourney is concerned. Now I would say, so Midjourney. So this is one illustration of grave danger of these technologies for democracy, right? For our lives together, that they are just perpetuating that bad stuff from the past. I will also say, so Midjourney does some amazing things also. So it's always this kind of mixed bag. So these photos, what I'm going to show you now. So this is actually they were made by somebody in my context, so a student of mine who has taken classes from me and has been checking in with me about her life kind of periodically, and she's working through a number of issues, and she periodically checks herself into a mental hospital, so she's struggling a lot with things, and she sends me things as she works through things, and she's allowed me to use these photos, which I use to just give you an illustration of how there can be something very positive about these technologies also. So that's a little bit of a joke. So that she works in a local bookstore on Harvard Square, and this is her way of rendering the idea that it was busy that day. So but as a way of, you can see what this does, right? So this is, if you knew the bookstore, you would actually recognize it. And it has a photorealistic quality, right? But this doesn't exist anywhere, right? So it exists on this screen right now, and she probably still has it somewhere, but it doesn't exist anywhere else, right? It's just put together by Midjourney. And then she did, so the class she took from me was a class on the meaning of life, actually, where we used a lot of artwork. Many of you will know Hieronymus Bosch, so he does like, this is Hieronymus Bosch real, kind of this kind of bizarre stuff, surreal stuff. And so when she was checked into a mental hospital, when she did this last, she asked to depict mental scenes in the style of Hieronymus Bosch, right? So that's what Midjourney did, right? And you see, this is not Hieronymus Bosch, this is a situation in a mental hospital in the style of Hieronymus Bosch. Then we also read, in that course, we read this story by David Foster Wallace, This is Water, It Just Matters. This is a story that involves a lot of water. And she used that to capture the atmosphere in the hospital. And again, look at this, right? They don't exist anywhere else. Look at the photorealistic quality. Look at this here with the shadows and then the ceiling, and it's just absolutely stunning. Right? Something like this is possible to capture the mood. Notice also in passing the two women in the look at all the faces, right? So there's nothing also in her instructions. So this is how you would put this in. There's nothing in her instructions that ask Midjourney to make this about white people. And they're all white again, right? So she happens to be white, but there's nothing about the instructions that made this. So, she also did one of me. So she called this Mathias attending a cult meeting, being bored. This is me attending a cult meeting, being bored. So that's what she called it. Anyway, so there is amazing things, right? I mean, that it allows her to be creative. It would allow each of you to be creative, right? So your fantasies, what you want as an image, that you don't find these out there, you put them together, you construct them in photorealistic quality, and you can, in a few years this will be doable with movies also, right? So that is, in terms of push of creativity, this is amazing. So then a little bit about how much more time do we have, Henrik? Minus
7 minutes.
7 minutes, okay. So a little bit about ChatGPT. Actually my personal favorite is Claude 2. Let me skip over a few things. Let me just so Claude 2. So of course, on the one hand, having these things, right, having ChatGPT, having Claude, and all these various things, in terms of gathering knowledge, this is pretty amazing, right? So in that sense, what could possibly be wrong with that, right? So I interact with this. I use this now every day. And as far as universities are concerned, we know we can't prevent this, right? So we know we can't do anything about it, partly because detection algorithms don't work at all. So you really, I shouldn't say this in front of students, but you really can't detect these. You really can't detect these. So on the one hand, this is pretty amazing, but there's also various deeply problematic things about this. And one of them is as a kind of general warning. Let me just say, so one experience that I had with this 2 weeks ago. So when the events in the Gaza area started happening first, this is a big deal for where I work every day, because we have not only a very strong Jewish population, but we have a lot of people from Arab countries. We have School of Public Policy. So these emotions are just there every day. So I'm teaching this class. It's on philosophy of technology. And the day when I needed to talk, when we were first back in the classroom, the topic for me was cyborgs. I'm not really close to that, but I had to somehow deal with that, right? I had to somehow talk about the topic somewhere or another. And I asked Claude how to do this. And you see, this is a highly non-trivial question, right, for a machine, right? So I thought of a few things, how to do this, how to make connections in constructive ways, and I explained the situation to Claude. And I'm embarrassed to say what Claude came up with was much better than what I had thought of. And I'm doing this for a while, right? So I'm a senior person, I'm a Harvard professor, I can do this. Claude can do it better. That was shocking. But then something else also happened. So I'm teaching this freshman seminar, so for members of our first year, on Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche is a reading group, where we're just reading Nietzsche from the beginning to the end and nothing else, just reading Nietzsche. And then I was curious. I wanted to see, what is Claude doing with the death of God theme? Right? I was just wanted to see whether this works for my other class too. And Claude hopelessly messed this up. Right? So Claude got all sorts of things wrong about where this is from and where that is wrong. And of course, these things are very polite. And you say you got this wrong, and they always say yes, I got this wrong. But in other words, one lesson I draw from that, and this is why I've told this story also to all my students. You've got to be really careful using this. So I feel like my generation, our generation, we are actually in an ideal position to use that, and you guys are not. Let me put this mildly more ecumenical. So it's you make best use of that if you can judge if it screws you, right? And which of course you have areas where you can also judge it. So this is why I find this very productive to use, because I typically tend to notice, or at least I don't use it when I don't notice, right? So when I can use this. But had I given a presentation using Claude for the Nietzsche material, this would have been terribly embarrassing, right? So if you can't judge, this is horrible. So there's this, right? That these things are called hallucinations, right? So there is this. I mean, there's going to be more bad news. So more bad news. So generally, we do find a lot of power imbalance, right, in the design of these things. Yeah? And so this is also something that is reflected again in ChatGPT. So one person who drew attention to this in a very visible way, I hope many of you will just Google her later tonight because she is an incredibly important person. So Timnit Gebru was working for Google, a fascinating person. She actually was an immigrant from Ethiopia, made a stellar career, getting ultimately a PhD in computer science from Stanford, was in this period since 2010 involved in much design of algorithms and really did exciting stuff, but also wanted to draw a lot of attention to how there's all sorts of problems around marginalization in different dimensions, right? There's marginalization in who gets credit for the design, who gets opportunities, who gets credit for building things, right? So there's that version of marginalization, and then how are power structures reflected in what these algorithms do, yeah? And how are gender and racial stereotypes perpetuated, right? She drew attention to that, and she's not the compromising type, right? She made a lot of enemies by speaking pretty bluntly. So she wrote this absolutely fascinating article. It's coming up somewhere. It's called something like race and gender in AI. So she says, after a group of people from marginalized communities sacrifice their careers to shed light on how AI can negatively impact their communities, their ideas are now getting co-opted very quickly in what some have called a capture and neutralize strategy. In 2018 and 19, respectively, MIT and Stanford announced interdisciplinary initiatives centered around AI ethics with multi-billion-dollar funding from venture capitalists and other industries, and war criminals like Henry Kissinger taking center stage in both opening events. Henry Kissinger is quite amazing at keeping himself around, right? He hasn't been in any kind of office since the late 70s, but here he is, right? And so in a way, this is what she is saying. A lot of people in the background are doing this work, but then when it comes to writing the big opening book, then Daniel Huttenlocher, who was the dean of the MIT campus on this, sides with tech entrepreneur Eric Schmidt and Henry Kissinger, rather than using the opportunity of actually elevating, people of color or women who actually have done much of the work in the dark. So that's one thing she's saying there. But she's also saying, so there's a lot of use. So this, in a way, it's like the same point about, what kind of imagery gets used, what kind of stereotypes get perpetuated. This is an example, actually, from the Israel-Palestine scenario, a case that really happened where relatively few people speak Arabic there, relatively many people speak Hebrew. They were analyzing something that was misunderstood and actually meant good morning, but was interpreted as attack them, and so they initiated something. And that is happening because, again, there's who is doing this, for whom are they doing this, who has been around, what data are available. So Timnit Gebru drew attention to that. So of course, all of that is also perpetuated, right? We are still doing that with ChatGPT. What ChatGPT will give you is all this prejudicial stuff still faced in. And so, then you can kind of draw attention to larger dangers here. Yuval Harari is one of these visible commentators on current affairs, who is, sometimes a bit too flashy for my taste, but here I think he got this right. So we are building this massive machine that has control over everything that we have ever said and written, right? So that's what these things do, right? So, and that in a way is a good way of capturing why this is so scary, what is happening right now. That we are empowering an artificial intelligence of sorts to have complete control over our intellectual legacy. Yeah? And imagine what that can do once it connects to all sorts of other systems, finance systems and other data storage systems, right? So this is really, it's a hallmark year, 2023. The invention of these things is really is a big step. Here's let me conclude with this. Well, there's one more quick thought after that, but. So now we are worried, and I know you have had your students read something about, in your courses what this would mean for the election next year. Well, the main thing to say about that is nobody knows, because the pace of change, right? I mean, it's just hard to, we only got these things in March, right? Look where we are. So two of my colleagues, Arvin Fang and Larry Lessig, actually kind of played this through what could happen, and they called this Clogger and Dogger. And so let's say, one party, let's say the Republican Party starts using a device called Clogger. And that's basically using ChatGPT in order to target people, millions of people, in very individual ways. It knows a lot about them, it starts conversations with them, it engages them, it has learned from how to engage other people. And it does that specifically in states that matter, like Wisconsin. When I live in presidential times, nothing ever happens, right? So no presidential candidate ever bothers to come to Massachusetts, right? The only thing that happens is some fundraising for stuff in the Midwest, right? So what happens here, I mean, you probably get flooded, right, with stuff in presidential election year. So it will happen in, something like that could happen in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, and Georgia. And so, Clogger is targeting people very specifically, in particular swing voters, right? And so then the other party realizes, the details don't matter, but you can easily see how that plays out, right? So there's kind of ever more specific targeting. Then the other guys are getting involved, right? So Dogger, so the Democrats are doing the same, right? And so before we know it, there's Clogger versus Dogger, and that is also unfolding certain dynamics such that once the person is in office, they have to continue to use Clogger and Dogger, because otherwise they're falling out of favor. Right? So that's one scenario, but the main thing to say there is we really don't quite know what's going to happen, but we really have to be vigilant. And the last thought, point 8, is really just this one slide here, you see, then I'm done. One person who I think has articulated almost prophetic views on what's happening in our age is Shoshana Zuboff, this fascinating book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And her basic point is very simple. Her basic point is that this whole tech development that we have seen over the last 20 years or so, really beginning with Google. Google started to make money when it figured out that all the kind of surplus behavior, the clicking behavior, could be used for advertising. Right? So basically predictions could be made from that. And from there, everything, all of these things have been, all the way to Midjourney and ChatGPT have been designed by the private sector. We're using Google, we are using ChatGPT, and they're fascinating things. Again, they provide knowledge, they help us, but they're designed by private companies. They're not designed with the intention to make our public sphere better. They are designed to make money for certain people that run these companies. And that by itself is enormously dangerous. And not that there's anything wrong with private companies, right? So let them make money, but we have basically handed over our public sphere, our information system to the private sector, and that of course is also the same with ChatGPT and Midjourney. They are privately owned things. They're not putting them out there to do something good for the future of humanity. They're putting them out there to make money. So really the most important thing to say is on these things, we all need to remain very, very, very vigilant, and it matters right now. This is an incredibly important time. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And we're now turning to the Q&A. Given our sort of advanced time, there was so much information here. It was great to hear. Having said that, I would ask you to keep your questions fairly short, and we will try to keep the answers also short. We can get a couple of questions here tonight. So who wants to go first? Questions, comments? Jeff?
Do you think a computer will ever be programmed to be self-aware and exhibit curious tendencies?
The question is about self-awareness for computers.
I think it's given the pace of change, I think that is a genuine possibility. Am I confident that it will be happening by 2029? I do not know, but I think it's a genuine possibility. And if you ask me to bet, I'd be betting something like, I'd be betting $2,000 that will happen by 2050, roughly that.
Thank you. Next question. Laura.
Thank you. The question that I was interested in the pictures that you had, that the woman had taken, the perpetuation of the same old thing. So can you comment about the current approach or attitude of many places to want to do away with DEI?
DEI is...
DEI, diversity.
Equity
Oh.
and inclusion.
No, it's terrible. It's terrible. I mean, we badly need that. Yeah. So I mean, if you just ask me what do I think about that, it's terrible. We clearly have not made as much progress in that domain as we. And you know, the one thing about this is about diversity and inclusion. There's very different angles on that you can take, right? So you can take an angle from rectificatory justice. We need to do that because people haven't had chances in the past, right? But you can also think about this very differently. You can also, in medicine, this sort of thing matters hugely, and even in all over the natural sciences. People who come from different backgrounds look at things differently.
Yes.
They see things differently. They're not doing different science or different medicine, but they see different things. They have different agendas. They look for different things, and thereby they find new things. So diversity is knowledge enhancing very much. So we need that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's what I was taught many times over the years, and it's kind of strange to see what is happening politically today with that thought.
Yeah.
Other questions, right here. Student.
So with like the AI art generators, should artists be scared for their jobs at all?
It's been happening in Hollywood, right? So
Yeah,
they went on
yeah.
strike. They came to some settlement. So it's which I mean they should be. And I think this is not going to go away. So in a way, what Uber and Lyft have been for cab drivers, this stuff is now becoming for everybody in Hollywood, right? So both for script writers and the image creation, and it's been a long way coming, right? I mean, you think about the Harry Potter movies and then the Lord of the Ring movies. I mean, those completely revolutionized what you could see on the screen, and was kind of from there. Now this is just kind of catapulting us into a future. So, this is kind of this double-edged sword that I'm seeing here. Right? So on the one hand, what is pretty amazing, that within a few years, you and I can do movies, right? Just like we can use Midjourney today, and we can be creative in this way. But of course, it also means that this will be massive changes in the it's like Hollywood might look like a 20th and early 21st century phenomenon. So I think this strike thing is an early symptom of things to come. They have just kind of calmed things down because they can't have too much disruption. But my prediction would be that we're going to see movie companies emerging pretty soon that turn all of that over, the production largely over to AI devices. And they will find that they can produce, movies that otherwise cost $30 million. They can do them for pittance, and the trend will be going there. So I'm much more confident about that than about the self-confident machine.
Yeah, really important question. Thank you, Gary.
Should I see AI as being a certain point on the timeline of technological change? Or is it a whole new thing that we've never ever, that has no relation to things we've ever had before?
Well, so far, I think it's the former. You can see it on a timeline, right? A massively accelerating process. So really, the picking up of pace since in this, this window since roughly 2010, lots of things, breakthroughs, right? And then this last year, the curve gets steeper. If it were to come to something like an intelligence explosion, there's a reason why that is called a singularity, right? It's something extraordinarily different, right? That we have something like this, this artificial intelligence broadly outdoing us, and once we can build that, it can build, and it can build, and so on, right? So it's called a singularity because that is just so discontinuous with everything. But this is also, the very idea is also very contested, right? So I recently had a conversation with a physicist about that, who basically said nature doesn't sustain singularities at all because this will require too much energy, right? It will settle at some point. But it is one thing that is amazing about this whole field is how much disagreement among people in the know there is about the possibility and the time frame of this occurring. So if it came to something like that, that would be a rupture from everything we have seen so far. There would be no continuities anymore.
Ursula.
I was wondering if you've heard about Nightshade, the coding that can sort of for AI and like the potential for that sort of programming to like further complicate the power of AI.
I've not heard it. What's that?
I just read about it yesterday, but it's apparently artists can put in code so that when the machine learning is picking up image, it will translate it incorrectly. So it'll turn dogs into cats.
I see. Yeah.
It's called Poison for AI. I mean, it's a new thing that has been developed.
So is this like an obstruction effort, or is it,
obstruction.
These calls for obstruction, obfuscation, and these things, they are around, right? That people say, in a way, this is not, way less extreme than the Unabomber, but it's kind of that tendency, right, to say, we need to disrupt this now, and we can't trust the people who build it, right? And really this point that they're building it, but they also think there's a 6% likelihood that it's going to kill us eventually, right? So one can't find too much fault with people who say, we have to throw wrenches into the system, and at least I want to express some sympathy for that.
We have time for one or two more questions. Again, short question if possible. Angie?
So in his class, we watched like a campaign ad that was AI generated. And with that in mind, do you think AI can potentially like cause negative partisanship or even like political polarization because they're able to produce like ads so quickly, and most people don't like have a really good concept of politics?
This is the point about the Dogger scenario, right? And these things are actually the empirics of that are actually amazingly tough, right? So one tends to think social media is all horrible and people get swayed, but when empirical people look into this and so how do people actually change their opinions, right? Actually turns out to not be that easy to trace. So it's really what one would think is often not true. But certainly in terms of potential, right? So what is scary about that is it's not so much that they're producing campaign ads, kind of broadly speaking, right? But that there's something, let's say you are a swing voter, and so they know that about you, and the either Clogger or Dogger or both will target you, and they learn ever more about you, and they target you with particular things, right? They also realize, you are a smart person, so it can't be something completely blunt, right? So they will think about what is the kind of thing that would, people like with your characteristics, whatever they would be, that are politically pertinent, how to target you. And that is definitely one danger that in swing states, there's often, and one thing that matters about swing states is often the turnout, right? So if it's just a matter of, a presidential election could be decided by 30,000 people going to, we could have scenarios like that, right? That one person actually has way more than 10 million, in the popular vote, but the particular states where it would matter, including yours here, 30,000 people that day decided not to vote, and so the other guy wins, right? And I think that is actually a very real possibility of what will be done and very easily possible next year.
You mentioned biases, just to make sure I don't engage in bias questionnaire. Make sure I don't ignore this. Is there anybody here? Perfect. Please.
So with Midjourney, I'm assuming that is a standalone model that you can download on your computer. You don't need any internet connection. I know Stable Diffusion was. That's what I'm more familiar with.
Yeah.
So do you think that these standalone models, if people started using these over centralized ones that exist, such as like ChatGPT, where you need to connect to a centralized server, do you think that using standalone models like this would mitigate some of the negative impacts of AI in society?
Why
and to what extent?
What's your intuition? Why would that be?
Because as people communicate with ChatGPT and stuff, you're essentially interacting with it, and you're giving it a lot of information that might be useful for it to
So freestanding would be kind of a sandbox model. It would only be, I think that, so basically, so my university actually does that. It uses them in this way, so it kind of sandbox them for us so that we interact with it, but really in this kind of information generating. So we're not putting anything back in the system. Right? We're not creating this kind of surplus stuff. So yeah, that's, I mean, if you're asking for ways of kind of domesticating that, right, and taking it away from the possibility of the private sector to do ever more with that, I think that would definitely be a very valuable strategy.
All right, thank you.
Was there anybody else over here on this side that I didn't see earlier? Okay, with that being said, let's thank our speaker. Thank you all for coming tonight, and our next event will be November 14th on how to reduce the impact of big money in elections. So we hope we can see you at 6:30 that evening. Thanks again for coming tonight.